downtime. But now, the Federal Aviation Administration is setting new rules on that. It will require 10 consecutive hours of rest between shifts. The new regulations are designed to help flight attendants do their jobs. This all during the pandemic, and some of us passengers are clearly making it worse. Last year, the FAA reported nearly 6,000 incidents with unruly passengers. So far this year, it's reported more than 2,000. This morning, the agency's acting administrator, Billy Nolan, spoke about the new regulation.
I can tell you firsthand that well-rested crew members are important to safety. And as we've seen too often recently, they are in the front lines, or they're on the front lines, responding to unruly passengers who could threaten the safety of flight and other passengers.
Joining us now is Sara Nelson, Union President of the Association of Flight Attendants. Ms. Nelson, welcome. Good to see you again.
Great to be with you, Joshua.
So what do you make of this regulation change? How different is this revised rule from what flight attendants were entitled to in terms of downtime?
This is a huge difference, and this is something our union has been working on for 30 years, way back when Norm Mineta first proposed this in 1994. We had to work on the science. We had to show that flight attendants were actually fatigued. And what this means is that in the operation, airlines could schedule flight attendants to 9 hours, but they could bring them down to 8 hours. That 8 hours is from the time we step off the plane until we step back on the plane again the next day. So that means getting through the airport, getting something to eat, calling our families, getting undressed into bed, trying to settle down. Get a little rest, and then do the routine in the morning to get ready, go back and do your briefing, get through the airport, all of that. All of that was counted as part of the rest. So that meant 45 hours in the bed, changing this from 8 hours to 10 hours, irreducible rest, 2 additional hours, a chance for us to get 8 hours, but certainly 6 or 7 is a huge relief to flight attendants who have been working around the clock and working longer days, frankly, since this pandemic.
Talk a little bit more about the pandemic. You and I have spoken about the impact that COVID has had on flight attendants and on airlines and just on the business in general. How are flight attendants doing these days in terms of the worst of COVID apparently for now being over and there being so much demand, pent-up demand for people to travel? How are flight attendants holding up?
I mean, this is really difficult. This has been the most difficult sustained time in the history of aviation for flight attendants. Being on the front lines with minimum crew members, more passengers than ever, no space on our planes, generally people who are not used to flying or infrequent travelers, so a lot of questions, even if you don't have that conflict. And then, of course, the conflict that you were just talking about has been extremely risky, extremely dangerous, and has led flight attendants to think when they're putting on that uniform, is that going to be a sign of leadership and reassurance in the cabin for people that day, or is it going to be a target for a violent attack? And this has been a very difficult time to work through.
Billy Nolan, the acting FAA administrator we heard from, talked about the role that flight attendants play in flight, including in emergency situations. Here is more of what he said this morning. Watch.
I'm a pilot. And as any pilot can tell you, we cannot fly the plane without the safety expertise and support of flight attendants. They know the location of every piece of equipment needed during an emergency: fire extinguishers, first aid kits, flotation devices, oxygen masks, and emergency slides.
Sara Nelson, give me an example of something among all of those duties that he referred to that you're concerned about doing wrong, doing improperly, if you're sleep deprived. Like, are there 1 or 2 duties in particular that, pardon the pun, keep flight attendants up at night when they can't get enough rest?
Sure, absolutely. Not responding quickly enough to a medical emergency, and we're the only responders there, and our slow action means that someone actually loses their life. Not getting to a fire fast enough that starts with a cell phone or a laptop computer, or some other malfunction on the plane. We know that little problems become big problems very, very quickly. It can actually threaten the lives of everyone on board. And if we're really not alert enough to be able to respond and get people off that plane, or to be able to recognize a security threat, or just someone who is threatening the safety of everyone on board because they are acting out, we're not getting to that quickly enough, or we're not able to respond in a way that best utilizes our de-escalation skills to be able to bring the temperatures down, people can get hurt. These are very serious issues, and this has been a serious safety loophole that we're closing with this rest regulation. And it's based on science that shows that flight attendant fatigue is real, it is frequent, and the best way to combat it is more rest.
Before I let you go, I want to share something that occurred to me on a flight I took a few weeks ago. I came up with a term for some of these people, FUFU, F-U-F-U, which stands for feet up F-U. And I define a FUFU as a person said in their inappropriate, unhelpful, or boorish ways who defiantly rejects more reasonable behavior. I was sitting, and a dude in first class had his feet right up on the wall of the first class cabin. And I thought, of all places to put your feet up and be disrespectful here to these people, before I have to let you go, I got to ask the question that I keep hearing people ask. What the hell is wrong with some of these people? Why don't passengers respect the work that flight attendants do? I really don't get it. If you understand it, I'd love to know before we go. What is up with some people?
My gosh, I really appreciate this question, but I do want to remind you that the vast majority of people come to the door of our plane wanting just a safe, uneventful flight, and they are people who want to be helpers. But we hear more often, and just a few people can make it miserable for all of us. People are super, super stressed out. We are often on the tip of the spear for political or social issues happening in the country. There has been this narrative from leadership that there is a major divide in this country and have kept people at odds and in total anxiety. Not to mention the fact that inequality is running rampant and people can't afford to live where they are. They can't afford to get health care for their family and friends. People have to beg for sick leave if they're sick. The conditions in this country are just driving people insane.
Sara Nelson, Union President of the Association of Flight Attendants, thank you for letting me vent about the FUFU on my flight. I'm not going to think about him anymore, and I appreciate the work that flight attendants do. Good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you, too. Take care, Joshua.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including new protections for reproductive rights.